Okay, it's 7 o'clock. Let's go ahead and call the meeting to order. Could we have a roll call?
Bill Brown,
Here.
Annie Adams, Leonardo Kovas, Kara Dudek,
Here.
Cynthia Hoyle,
Present.
Audrey Ishii,
Here.
Susan Jones, Jeff Marino,
Here.
Craig Schonkweiler,
Here.
Nancy Westcott,
Here.
Morgan White. Here. We have a quorum.
Okay, thanks. I know we're competing with Prairie Cycle Club volunteer dinner tonight for their upcoming ride, and also a moonlight ride later. That might be distracting some people, but I'm glad we have a quorum. So next we have approval of the agenda. Are there any additions or corrections to the agenda? Oh, we have two more. Annie came in and Leo came in. Okay, if not, could we have a motion to approve the agenda?
I'll make a motion.
Moved by Craig. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second by Jeff. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the agenda's approved. Approval of minutes from previous meetings. We had one from last meeting. I think we were caught up before that. Everybody get a chance to look through those? We just have the one set to approve tonight, right? Or was there another set? Okay. And were there any corrections? Anybody have any corrections? Okay, then is there a motion to approve the minutes from, what was that, May?
I'll move to approve the
No,
previous...
June.
The June minutes.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Is there a second?
Second.
Moved by Morgan, seconded by Leo. Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries. The minutes are approved. Okay, is there any public input tonight? Doesn't appear to be. Unfinished business? We don't have any unfinished business. I'll make a short report here just so I don't forget. I did present the snow route expansion that we approved, the resolution to expand the snow shoveling, mandatory sidewalk snow shoveling areas. Presented that at committee of the whole meeting last week. It's fairly well received. There was some discussion about the imposition on single-family homes. I actually pointed out that there were only 6 on Green Street that are owner-occupied, and 1 in the new campus area that's owner-occupied. And I mentioned that there was some discussion of city resources being used and stuff, but the mayor told me that she supports it, so we don't need to do anything else at council, and they plan on bringing something later this fall to City Council after Public Works get a chance to kind of inventory the sidewalks or determine what I think they were going to look at the kind of the history of the ordinance, how much resources it's taken to enforce things like that, and then bring that to council for discussion before this winter. So hopefully something will be done yet before the next snow shoveling season.
Just to add a little to that, because of our Safe Routes to School grant, I included money for purchasing equipment for volunteers, and so we will start working on that and try and meet with some groups that we had. See You at Home, for example, had expressed interest in doing some clearing. So we've got the ability to beef up the volunteer program. And so it might be nice if we could talk about providing a recognition program here where we could do sort of like a monthly recognition or an annual recognition of a volunteer. With the money that I had for the grant, we could this year even maybe provide some sort of a prize. And so we had money in there to do things like hats and gloves and shovels, and I want to get some vests too, safety vests that people can use if they would like. So those are things that hope to be working on this fall.
Okay, thanks.
Cynthia, I'd be happy to help you with the incentive program and how to maybe organize it or design it. I'm doing like a STEP program at work right now, and it's bizarre. It makes me like bike a little more and things. So yeah, they work. So
Okay, new business. We have Crystal Lake Park one-way road study. Kara is going to tell us about that.
Okay, thank you for having me, and I know a lot of you actually gave input on the one-way road study back in November, and I thank you for coming to the meeting. Just wanted to bring this back and overall just show you the process we went through, the study we went through with Fairgram to determine if it was feasible for Crystal Lake Park to a one-way road system with one way for vehicles and then the other lane for bikes and pedestrians. First, I'll just do a quick recap of the Crystal Lake portion of the Park District's Trails Master Plan, and that's really where this idea came from. I'm not expecting you to read this all, but what I wanted to talk about is the loop trail opportunity. So this was finished in the end of 2015, beginning of 2016, and it really just talks about using the park road as a loop system. So right now there's lots of paths and there's the road, and sometimes there's a path along the road and sometimes there's not, and sometimes you go off in one direction and you're not really sure where you're going because there's not great wayfinding right now either. And so it's bringing together this idea of you could know that if you get on this loop, you could take this loop multiple times, and it's, you know, approximately 1.5 miles, and you could just continue to do that and know where you are and you know, train for a race or hold a race in the park, things like that. So why did we initiate this study? It's really to increase safety for everyone in the park. You can see in this picture that there is a family walking on the road with a stroller and multiple dogs. So people are already using the park road as their path system, and how can you formalize that and make it safer for everyone? And not only that, like I mentioned earlier, the connectivity of paths. So part of the road has a path along the side of it, but then the path turns north past the Aquatic Center, and the road loops back south and goes out to Broadway Avenue. So helping people understand, you know, connectivity within the park and really how they can use that to enhance their experience at the park. Of course, we're always about enhancing recreational value in our parks and making more of what we have. And then lastly, and absolutely not the most glamorous thing, is creating a maintenance schedule for the road, because the Park District owns the entire road within the park, and it's up to us to maintain it. And so there's some parts of it that are in better shape than others, or portions of it have been replaced over time. So this really, there's a whole part of the study that literally was just core samples of the road, and you know, how much may it cost to do this part, or how much, so that we can budget that in and really bring the infrastructure up to date also. So first, with Fairgram, they looked at case studies. They were all some variety of one-way vehicles and two-way bikes and pedestrians. Sometimes they were actually just all bike and pedestrian, the road that had been transitioned. Some of these places, they were so popular on the weekends or on certain days that they just cut it off to cars for that particular day and had bike and hike days where you could just totally take over with your bikes and your strollers, scooters, and whatnot. And those three places were Cherokee Park in Louisville, Kentucky, Washington Park in Springfield, Illinois, and then Prospect Park in Brooklyn. And the one that was closest to Crystal Lake Park was Washington Park, just based on the road width and some of those things. Prospect Park is a much bigger park, and also the road is much wider, so they had space in some places to do vehicles one way and cyclists in their own lane with a buffer and pedestrians. So I have a map of the Crystal Lake Park Road here, and I just want to sort of talk you through it, take you on somewhat of a virtual tour about what I'm talking about in case you're not that familiar with the park. The red on the map is the park road. So you enter, we're entering from the south here off of Park Street. To the right, you'll see the large pavilion and the lake house. You'll continue on and you'll see there's a playground on the right-hand side also. You loop around and sort of go down a hill, some of the only topography as far as this road system is concerned. You continue along, and all this way there's a path paralleling the road that a lot of people do use. The road comes very close to the lake, and there's some parking. You continue on, and you get to the edge of the lake, and also there's a lot of parking in this area. And it's the day camp pavilion is what we refer to it as. That's where nature day camp, and there's just like 60 to 70 kids there every day in the summer right now. There's a sand volleyball court. And then you get to the vehicle bridge. So it's the only vehicle bridge over the saline that we have in the park. And then the path goes north past the aquatic center, and the road continues on. A lot of people like to walk or jog in this area because it's very shady as the park road turns south. You go around Franklin Street, and then you come out on Broadway. And all of that, the park road, is about 1.2 miles. And then with the new ITEP path along Park Street, that's a 10-foot wide multi-use path on the south side of the park. And along with the city of Urbana, when they were redoing Broadway Avenue, we were able to add an 8-foot wide path along the northern part of Broadway. So there's a lot of pedestrian infrastructure there, but there is a missing piece from the saline or the bridge at Stebbins Drive south to the corner of Park and Broadway. There's still just a 4-foot wide sidewalk. So once that is complete is when you'll be able to do a full loop on a multi-use path without leaving the park at all.
Can you point out where the suspension bridge is there too? Do you remember?
The suspension bridge over the saline is about right in here. Is that
So sometimes people will walk on the road there to get to the suspension bridge and then take the path back around too on the other side of the saline.
Mm-hmm. So I put up here an example of one of the boards that was used at the public input session just to show you that some of the things that were looked at. So Fairgram looked at things like where the parking existed on what side of the road, where there were turning conflicts. So I'll talk about it more later, but there were traffic counts done with our Trails Master Plan that showed where people were entering the park, and more people were entering from Park Street than were off of Broadway. And because of that and other reasons I'll talk about later, they were looking at starting the one-way system on the south side of the park from Park Street and moving around. And so the turning conflicts are if the vehicles are on the right side of the road and there's parking on the left side of the road, and then they have to turn over those that are walking or on bikes. And so there are less turning conflicts starting from Park Street and going around than there is from Broadway and going around the other way. Another thing that people voted on at the public input meeting was they were given a series of cross sections, and this map is merely to show you that there are a few different colors, and the way that the road was divided up was based on similar characteristics. So most often it was the width of the pavement, or there's like this small yellow section here, and that's the bridge because it really is unlike any other part of the road. And so, like I mentioned, for the direction of travel, it's recommended that people enter at Park Street for the one-way system, go through and exit at Broadway Avenue. Fewer turning conflicts. Traffic counts demonstrated that this was the preferred method based on how people were already using the park. And also, those that stopped by at the meeting were asked to give their thoughts, and also supported going off of Park Street. This is an example of one of the cross sections. So like I mentioned, based on the various widths, there were a couple different options that were presented to the public. And so for example, it would say you have a 20-foot wide piece of road. Do you want it to be 10 for those on bikes and pedestrians and 10 for those in vehicles? Or do you want it to be more for one group? In some places there's parallel parking, like near the playground, and that's about 28 feet wide. So what do you do there? How do you want to divide it up? Do you want it to just be down the middle? And what most of those who attended the meeting said was keep it narrow for the vehicles. They wanted it to be predictable and safer because of slower speeds. And the report also goes into, pulling recommended widths from, NACTO guidelines and FHWA and things like that, in which it recommends for urban streets of something like this to be 9 to 10 feet. Some other considerations in the report are the pavement condition and maintenance, like I mentioned, pavement markings. So thinking about how are you going to convey to the users exactly what's going on and make it safer for everyone. And then it looked at the case studies also, and it was determined that based on the Illinois rules of the road and other precedent places, that a single white line, 6 inches wide, would be what would divide the 2 lanes. And there's also opportunities for signage. The sign on the left just has, it's a standard sign used for bikes and pedestrians on a wide multi-use path. And so that is an example of something that exists, but this is a little bit different of a scenario. And so you could do something like, you could have the bike self-select. So you could have a vehicle and a bike on one side, and you could have a pedestrian on a bike on the other side based on what your confidence level is. But that is not a standard sign, so that would be something that would be determined at the time of installation. So in conclusion, the report determined that with appropriate signage and lane markings that the one-way system would be feasible. And I also want to note that we really need to fill that gap between Park and Broadway and the entrance to Crystal Lake Park at Stebbins before we truly dive into making this study a reality.
Okay, thanks. Is there, I think you already did the engineering, or did you get a grant for the engineering for that?
When we received the grant for the path along Park Street, we also asked for funds to do preliminary engineering, so we have phase 1 for that
Okay.
section.
Great.
Any questions? Yeah, go ahead.
So I thought I would note the 3 examples that you gave. Prospect Park in New York, they have now completely closed their road to vehicles because it was so successful. And just having spent some time in a community that has really succeeded in creating a multimodal transportation system in Sweden, everywhere that I went, they had a cycle path that was 2-way, and then if there was a street that it was right next to, then the pedestrians would be on the far side. And so along with the road, you always had the infrastructure for the other modes. So I think something like that would work here. I'd have to check and see what their dimensions were. And it didn't take a lot of paint or signage. It was pretty simply identified, and it worked pretty well. Now, I should say that the university there has 45,000 students, most of which were not there, so it could look quite different when they have all of those people back in the community. But I think that this will work really well for the community, and I think people will use it a lot when you get it put in.
Other comments? Annie?
Yeah. Cara, does the Park District need any assistance from BPAC or any sort of like advocacy for the gap between Park and Broadway, or is that what you all were talking about, like it's happening, or?
There's a new round of the grant that we got for the Park Street path opening up in October. So we will apply then, and at that point, a recommendation or even like a letter of support would be helpful, but that's we're working towards. What's interesting about that section, though, is the sidewalk on the bridge is 4 feet wide, and so then we're looking at doing a pedestrian bridge, and then you're looking at floodplains, and then all of a sudden you're kind of like way outside of my knowledge, and so that's why we really needed help and to look further into it.
Yeah, I led a bike ride there this weekend with a bunch of very inexperienced cyclists, and it was great. We're like coming down the 8 foot wide, and then I was like, oh, I forgot.
Yeah.
I was like, single file! but it's fine. I mean, at least it's there. At least that 8 foot's there, and then that other one's there. But yeah, it would explain why, because I was like, why has this never been fixed? And
Yeah.
you just answered my question.
And that 8 foot wide path was only installed in 2015, so it's pretty new.
There used to be a low pedestrian bridge there a few years ago. But I guess it rusted out or became
Yeah, I think it just fell into
unusable.
disrepair.
Yeah.
And so we're looking at applying for that grant.
So is the idea that the multi-use path would be 2 ways for bikes?
Mhm.
And then the bikes would go 1 way on the road? Would it be possible to have like a pedestrian use and a human-powered wheeled use and a driving route use? Could you split it by 3, or does it have to be split in half?
The average width is just 19.6 feet, I believe is what it is. So it's like to have a viable vehicle lane and a true multi-use path. If there was cyclists passing in 2 directions, it's only wide enough for those 2 uses. Or else it would be like really narrowing everyone's use, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that would be interesting. I guess seems like most cyclists would be able to use the car lane or the
Yeah, they
the
could
vehicle lane. What do we call that lane?
self-select to be with the vehicles, but then they should be going only in the one
Yeah.
way
What's
direction.
is there an official speed limit there? Like
Yeah, there's a posted speed limit, which is 20.
20? Yeah, I don't even think most people go 20. They
They go pretty
through the-
slow
Yeah.
through the park.
Yeah.
And you have the precedent of Meadowbrook, which is only 8 feet, right?
It's 10.
Is it 10 feet? Okay. And it gets a lot of use, and cyclists and pedestrians share that space. Yeah, I think the thing that we have to keep in mind is that there are going to be people with children, and they're going to want to be separated from the vehicles. And so we need that space to be viable for all of those users.
And the Prospect Park example, some of their roadways were 30 feet wide, and so they could have pedestrian buffer, bicycle buffer, and then still have vehicle and have enough space. But in a lot of places, we don't have that.
I do see quite a few. I walk there almost every weekend, and I do see quite a few elderly people that use it as a driving park. They just would drive through on their way somewhere. I'd hate to see that completely lost. So I'm glad. It'd be nice to to get to the point where you have 1,000 people walking there, and you want to close the roads. But it's also important to keep in mind that there are such things as kind of drive-through parks.
Well, it's a form of recreation
Yeah.
for some people. I mean, and also you'd be surprised at the number of people who just drive to the park and eat their lunch in their car just to
Park.
be,
Mhm.
in another space. So, yeah.
Like, how much parking is there? Like, if you had to, like, on weekends, start shutting down because it was so busy and there were so many people, like, how much parking would you lose?
It's a little over 100 spaces, including both the accessible parking and just the regular parking spots.
When there's swim meets there, sometimes on weekend mornings it gets pretty full because they'll use that
Yeah.
north parking lot.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a little bit over 100.
Yeah, you could
spots.
potentially think of doing something like a ciclovia on Sundays and close it to vehicles, but I think on Saturdays they've got a lot of activity. And I guess during the summer, kind of also depends. The parking, the overflow parking for the swimming pool, is that accessed through a separate road? Or do people need to use this road to access parking?
There's overflow parking off of Broadway, but then people do park to the south of the mechanical building for the pool, which you do need the road to access.
Yeah.
There's 108 spaces.
I think that's a very fun idea to have a cyclovia like on a Sunday morning, or, I mean, and the pool's not open year-round either, so there's lots of opportunities for maybe when the pool's closed, you can have the cyclovia or things like that. It's a really, and because people will drive to those as well, so you will also need that, your 108 parking spots and all that other stuff. So.
Okay, thanks. Next on the agenda is walking routes to Victory Park. Gillian and Cynthia, are you going to help with that too? Yeah. Okay. Welcome.
Sure, yeah, go ahead. So I'll introduce Jillian. She's a student in the planning program at the University of Illinois. And this summer, she wanted to do a project with us with our Safe Routes to Parks program. And we had started that during the spring semester with my former intern. In fact, there were 2 interns that worked on it, Jasmine and, Rodolfo? I'm blank. Ricardo, there we go, Ricardo. And we held our first meeting with we chose to do the Victory Park, and Jillian will talk about all of this a little bit more. And we did some walking audits, but we hadn't processed the data or done the report yet, and she has passed out to you a copy of the report and an infomatic that we got from another organization, and so I will turn it over to Jillian.
Thank you, Cynthia. Hello, everyone. My name is Jillian, and like Cynthia introduced, I'm working with her on the Safe Routes to Park project. I'm honored to be here tonight to give the presentation on our project. So here's a brief agenda. I'll be introducing the Safe Routes to Park and showing the process and the results of our first walk audit with the historic East Urbana neighborhood to assess walking routes to Victory Park. So first of all, allow me to introduce a little bit more about Safe Routes to Park. It is a program aiming to make walking, rolling, and biking safe and easy, and we make effort to identify routes that are safe, accessible, comfortable, conveniently located, and well-maintained and programmed. And that is also about within 10 minutes walking distance to parks. And we consult the concept and adapt the toolkits from Safe Routes to Parks, which is one of the Safe Routes partnership, as well as the National Recreation and Park Association. These are the 2 national organizations that seek to increase park usage and improve the health and well-being for people. So to accomplish the goals, it is important for us to understand what is preventing community residents from using the roads, the park. So we present our program to HUNA, which is Historic East Urbana Neighborhood Association, at their monthly meeting, and to engage residents of the area. And we also, to increase the community engagement, we posted the survey to their Facebook group. Also, we posted the survey online via the Champaign-Urbana Safe Routes to School project website. So, and besides the survey, we also engaged volunteers to conduct walk audits to Victory Park. Walk audit is a tool for people to assess how supportive the streets are for walking and rolling. While walking, people will be documenting the infrastructure and behavior of the people walking and factors that contribute to comfort. And this is the map of our walking audit to Victory Park. So on both April 26th and 29th, we had walk audits with 11 participants and 4 starting points, which are Illinois and Wayne, Maine and Hartle, Main and Vine, as well as Washington and Cottage Grove. They were selected by utilizing the routes for our Safe Routes to School project, integrating community input, and looking at the Google map at where people live, as well as the locations from 4 directions from the park. And from the walk audit, we learned that the new apartment complex being built, community residents are seeking to relax and exercise more in the Victory Park, and their common concerns now include poor sidewalk pavement condition, short crossing time at signalized intersections, speeding cars, littering, and a lack of signage showing directions to park or information about the park. We summarized the issues and concerns from the audit for each route. For Cottage Grove and Washington, we can find that there were a couple of broken and cracked trip hazards that could prevent people from walking safely. And there were also sidewalks that are not wide enough for 2 people to walk side by side easily. And there were also other documentations of concerns that people including for crossings and intersections. The crossings does not have a pedestrian activated button, and Washington Street are pretty busy, and the car speeds appear to be too fast. There were also vacant lots and random buildings, and that prevents people from feeling safe in walking in the neighborhood. And there are also cases that people feel that they need some benches for them to rest. And for another starting point, Main and Vine, the picture shows that there were a huge broken and cracked sidewalk, according to the first picture. And there were also occasions such as sidewalk being blocked by overgrown landscaping. Also, there are improvements to be made for the crosswalk mid-block at Schnucks, because it might need a pedestrian activated signal or a pedestrian island due to the wide road. And also, people will not feel safe, and it's not easy for them to cross easily. And there was traffic signals that did not leave enough time for people to cross at the intersection, such as Main and Vine. And other suggestions could be improved, that drivers appeared to be speeding, and there were also vacant lots or random buildings. For Illinois and Vine, there were uneven brick sidewalk that could be difficult for rolling. And on Vine, there was nothing separating sidewalk from street, which is feeling very dangerous for people when they were walking. And there were also other problems, such as missing crosswalk, and cars appeared to be speeding. And last was Main and Hartle, which had plenty of trip hazards shown in the picture. And the second picture showed that there were the poorly maintained sidewalk. Also, this third picture will show that the crossing is very difficult because there were no crosswalk at all. And for the park itself, people recorded seeing trash and bottles and no signs showing directions to park or information about the park. And there was no restroom in the park, as well as there were no bike parking. Problems and opinions were also collected and recorded in this online interactive map, showing that the blue lines were the routes and the red marks and the crosses documented areas of concerns for people to refer to. Going back to the presentation. And that is all for my presentation. Thank you for listening.
Thanks. Is there an electronic copy of something with that link in it?
Which
the link to the online map that shows the problem areas? Or
we can post that on our website. We just posted some information about the program to the CU Safe Routes to School website, and we can post that there. In fact, our other intern Charlie is here tonight, and he's the one who's been working on that. And so we could certainly post that there for people to look at. I think our intention here is to, because this is a joint project with the Park District, and there is a program through the National Recreation and Parks Association that has grant funding for Safe Routes to Parks. So our hope is that when we've documented the issues that we find, there's a possibility that we could apply for some grant funding that the Park District and the city could share to address some of the problems, because we have an inventory of sidewalk conditions. With our pedestrian plan, we have really good documentation on that. However, putting it in the context of the routes to parks and getting the public input specifically on that topic gives us a good database to work from, and hopefully eventually identify the best routes to the parks. Because some of the routes are nice and direct, but the sidewalk conditions would make it difficult for someone with a wheelchair or other issues, stroller, et cetera, to navigate. And so we'd like to, for people to be able to easily get there. We've got some really great sidewalks. Green, of course, is in really good condition. The city spent a lot of money to improve that route. And I know that on Vine we have limited right-of-way right now, but some of the issues with the new developments that are occurring, we may be able to get some fixes done to sidewalks along Vine. But in terms of getting to the park from other directions, there are still some issues to be resolved. The Park District had also had a lot of discussion about restrooms in the park, and I just wanted to say that is not really an option that they're going to pursue at that park at this time for a variety of reasons. But people nevertheless were interested in having that conversation. And bike parking is something, though, I know that they are looking at doing. It's a pretty easy fix that they can offer at a number of the parks. And we just did our first walking audit for King Park that Jillian's been working on. And she and Charlie attended Jetty Roads Day and interacted with people and gave out some survey forms. We don't have a neighborhood association that's as organized or active there as we do with HUNA. They are very active and meet regularly, so it was easy to communicate with them. We're going to have to be a little more creative in reaching out to the neighbors for King and some of the other parks, and we're going to be working with the community learning labs this fall and some classes there to do outreach and do the bigger parks, because doing Meadowbrook and Crystal Lake is going to be a big project, and they're going to have a lot more comments about the park as well. So that's what we're hoping to do here, and this is also a project that was part of the I-Plan, which is our community health plan that's done every 4 years, and under active living and our goals of reducing obesity rates for adults and children. This was one of the strategies for doing that, was making it easier for people to get to and from parks, because the data is clear that people who have parks that they can walk and bike to have lower rates of obesity and other issues. So there were a variety of reasons that we headed in this direction, and we were lucky to have some interns that were interested in working with us, and we'll be working on it a little bit too as part of our grant project.
Thanks. Morgan?
So in the handout, you have suggestions, and there's recommendations about infrastructure, and it brings up adding streetlights. Were there parts where the street itself wasn't lit enough?
There were some places where people felt like the street lighting wasn't adequate. We had that same comment at King Park, and so I think we have to go look at night because it wasn't really clear to us when we looked on Google Maps where there weren't street lights on the street. So we were wondering if they were talking about in the park, and so that brings up the issue of technically the parks are closed at dusk, but in the wintertime, if you're using it for transport or exercise after work and it gets dark at 4:30, that makes it nearly impossible to leave it and not use it at dusk. And I know this has been a conversation they've been having in the Chicago area because the Forest Preserves actually ticketed some bicyclists who were commuting on their trails. So I know Active Trans and Ride Illinois have been working with them on this because people need to be able to use those routes for commuting, and it gets dark early in the north in the winter. So those are other issues that we can also talk about as part of this. And so when it gets dark that early, people do like more lighting. Right now we have to go there reasonably late to actually see what it looks like in the dark. And so we'll try and do that and take a look. It's people's opinions about how much light you need vary somewhat dramatically.
Yeah, I was thinking this was on the streets, not in the park. I was trying to understand that. Makes sense.
Yeah,
It
and
makes
some-
sense to me that it would come up for a conversation about in the park, but on the streets, I would think that it's probably fine. But I don't know. No.
Yeah, I mean, and it may depend on it may have been on one of the, I think Green has more street lighting, and Vine and Mainwood, but maybe not Hartle, and so maybe it was some of the other streets that people were looking for more lighting.
Yeah, Craig?
Cynthia, you mentioned a grant program. What was the name of the grant program?
I'll have to go. I think it's the Safe Routes to Parks.
Is that what it is? Do you know,
yeah.
like, dollar amounts that what they would fund and stuff?
You know, I couldn't tell you for sure, but if I remember correctly, it didn't include a dollar amount. It kind of left it open. And so I don't know how much is available, and we'll have to explore that further when we get further down the road. Also, with the $50 million that was included in the capital grant, that might be another opportunity for us if we've got this all put together in reports and documents with all the public input. That gives us another way to be competitive in applying to do some of the work.
Right.
So I think we'd like to be prepared, pursue the grants that we know are available now. I'm guessing that it's not going to, that pot of money is not going to be anywhere near the size of potential grants through the state. But if we were strategic in identifying specific links that were critical, that wouldn't be as expensive, because even though sidewalks aren't as expensive as streets, it adds up pretty quickly, as you know, when you're applying for funding.
Right. I'm interested in knowing more about your audit, sharing that information, I think, with RPC, since they're beginning to
Yeah.
wrap up their pedestrian master plan. And maybe some of this can be rolled into, at least mentioned within the PED master plan.
Yeah, we could mention it. We won't have any data on, the major parks or other stuff yet, because that's not going to happen until this fall and next spring.
Okay.
Just the public outreach and engagement with the neighborhoods is a pretty labor-intensive activity.
Sure.
And so we realize we already have a lot of this data with our pedestrian plan, and that was another reason why I thought we could sort of pursue this, is because we do have a lot of data. So we were able, to actually look at routes and know whether we have sidewalks and
Sure.
that kind of stuff already. And lots of places don't even have that much data.
Was this the first audit?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we chose that one because the neighborhood is so active,
Okay.
and the park is small and centrally located, and we know that there are generally good sidewalks in the area. There are maintenance issues, and we know what all the ramp issues are too. We've got the whole data set on ramps. And we had 11 people come and participate. Did you want to add anything, Jillian?
I think that was good.
Yeah. And King Park is your second audit?
We've been working on King. We have not gotten citizens to do walking audits there, and we haven't been able to figure out how to send out the survey yet. So we're going to have to do more work.
And is there a plan to continue audits at other parks then?
Yes, we had, Blair Park was the next one the Park District identified with us. And when we get the Community Learning Lab students lined up, they spend, I forget how many hours, they have a significant number of hours per week they have to work. and on these projects. So I'm expecting that we will have a lot of help from them and ask them to help us identify ways to get input from people about the parks and how they get there and how they'd like to get there. So I
Okay.
think we'll be able to beef up our outreach with more time that students have to get dedicate to it. And we'll keep you in the loop. I've tried to sort of keep city staff in the loop that we were working on this, because we want it to be helpful information that you all can use as well.
Yeah, good, thank you.
Have you presented this to HUNA?
No, we last month they had their annual picnic, and this month they're going to be rescheduling, but I'm in communications with Scott, and he's going to get back to me when they get their date set up. And so we'll do a presentation. Unfortunately, Jillian will not be here. She's going to be gone for a little while this summer and come back and finish up next semester. But we'll go do a presentation, and I'll get Charlie involved in that too.
I think the opportunities for grants, of course, is great. The city only budget has, what, $100,000 or $200,000 at the most for
Yeah.
sidewalks every year, and that doesn't
Right.
go very far.
No.
But some of the things you brought up and pointed out was like litter, that, you know, if the neighborhood associations are willing to take on some of that. And then the vegetation is, from the city's point of view, that's usually kind of a complaint-driven thing. So if somebody wants it fixed, you pretty much have to get somebody to either complain or talk to the
Yeah.
property owners or something, and maybe that's more of a neighborhood that could be encouraged or could make more progress with neighborhood support, I
And
think.
that raised a question in my mind I wanted to ask staff. I know we go out and trim trees on streets. So how do we decide where to do that? Do we do that based on complaints and input, or how is the program organized for doing that?
It's somewhat based on complaints, but it's more zones. So they went to
Oh,
a zone
okay.
system about 20 years ago. So
Oh, okay.
they go through a set zone every year, and they'll do safety trimming, but they went through, what they decided years ago was when they did work based upon complaints, they were scattered all over the
Yeah.
place, and
It's
they could never get
inefficient.
ahead. So what they did was
Yeah.
they switched to a zone-based system
Mm-hmm.
about 20 years ago. They go into set neighborhoods every year, and they go through the city that way. They've made it through, I think, once, and they're on their second or third target.
So they'll do trimming on private property as well as city property?
No.
Okay.
They
will
do
not.
only right of way.
Yeah, well, only within the right-of-way.
So any kind of vegetation hanging over from a citizen's property would still be
Right.
based on
Right.
complaints? And
Yeah, so they will address complaints, but they do try to stay with the zone. What they found was that by addressing it that way, they were able to really get ahead of a lot of it,
Yeah.
because they're not just handling the,
Yeah.
one tree limb, and then next thing you know, 3 years later, there's another tree limb. They're already handling everything
Right.
at one time
Do
and
they-
getting all the dead out.
Do they look at the sidewalks too when they're in that zone?
I am understanding they look at everything within the right-of-way,
Okay.
yeah.
Oh,
yeah,
good.
yeah.
As I noticed I guess Saturday, I was teaching a bike class, and we were going down the bike lane on Lehrman, and they had pruned back. There's one fence there that there's a volunteer tree that you guys are constantly
Right.
cutting back, and I noticed that they had cut it
Yeah.
cut
A
it
lot of
back
times
again.
we'll try to work with the property owner first, but if it's, we've had some that we've just had to take on our own just to get it done. Because they're, otherwise you're waiting too long. But
Yeah, yeah.
obviously it takes time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jeff?
I just wanted to say, Jillian, nice work. There was a lot of work that went into this. It was really impressive. Also, nice presentation. I did have one question. How would somebody know that lives in this area, like in 5 or 10 years after some improvements have been made, know where the safe routes are? Because it wouldn't be intuitive necessarily to know that if you live like 2 blocks off of a safe route, that, oh, this, 2 blocks over is this designated safe route where it's supposed to be nicer and safer to get to the park. Do any cities ever do any signage or anything that says this is a designated safe route to Victory Park or King Park or
I can answer that. What we were hoping and planning to do is to have the same system we do for Safe Routes to School, that the Park District could post the map for the safe routes on the website for each park. As we do with the school districts, each school has its own set of maps for safe routes to school, and Gabe tries to update those every 2 to 3 years, and based on some feedback I heard today, I think he has some interns working on updating them again right now. Usually there's not a lot of change in those when he updates them, but sometimes, you know, there are changes that we have to address. So that's our plan, and what we hope to have happen is that those would then be available on the park's website.
And I know I've contributed a couple of minor edits on the Google Maps for bicycle routing. I don't know how many people would actually think of doing the walk routing through Google Maps, though you can do it. Is there a way to, I wonder if they have a walk routing set up similarly where you can edit that and actually
For
submit a map to Google
Maps.
so that those routes will be prioritized if somebody happens to
They might,
walk
yeah.
directions. I don't know.
They might, I don't know.
But
That's
they
a
said
good
if it did get in there, I know it's kind of cumbersome to get going, but once it's in there, it's going to be in there for a while. Then you could at least direct people to use the Google Walk directions, and it should prioritize those routes.
Yeah.
Yep. Audrey?
I couldn't help but notice there's one thing that doesn't really cost money, and it's actually the most frequently listed problem, which is car speed. And it's listed 10 times under the speeding thing, but then it's also made it into crossings and intersections, making 11 times. And it doesn't really cost money to install a few signs reducing the speed. Is there any thought of doing something like that we don't have to wait for grants, we just need to install the signs?
Well, I think that we have to identify whether people are actually speeding, and that I think that takes some resources, and I think there's some locations it would be worth checking that. Based on the data that I've seen, though, sometimes people complain about speeding vehicles or vehicle volumes, and when they go out and collect the data, they actually find that it's the reverse that is actually the problem. And so sometimes our perceptions are not exactly what the problem is when you go and actually collect the data. So I think the city has to be methodical about how we address those kinds of problems and look at that further before we start changing speed limits, because if they got into that cycle, I think they'd have a lot of requests for lowering speed limits, and it might not have any impact on how fast people are going.
What is the reverse of the perception, that cars are going too fast?
That they would complain that people were speeding too much, but when they went out and collected the data, they found that most people were not speeding, but there was actually a problem with a lot of traffic volume. Or people complained there were too many cars, and what they found is actually that the problem wasn't that there was an enormous number of cars, that they were actually speeding. So sometimes when they went out and collected the data, they found that what people thought was the problem was actually another problem. And it was a problem, it was just not the problem people had perceived that it was.
Yeah, Nancy?
I have one comment about HUNA. We found great benefit in nearby churches to Victory Park. They've been very active in HUNA, or at least two in particular have been very active in HUNA. And the other thing is, I wonder if the King School PTA might be helpful in King Park. You've probably thought of those, but
Well, that was my thought too when school starts, to see if we can engage the King Elementary School community, because I think the school is sort of the community contact there. And because we have neighborhood schools, the majority of the kids going there live in the neighborhoods, and and they have a pretty high walking rate to King. And I know that the school uses the park quite a bit too for various activities. So I was thinking exactly the same thing, that when school starts, I would like to work with the school to see if we could send a link out to the survey to the parents and get some input that way, because we don't have as, like the Facebook group for HUNA, they're on there nearly every day, and there's a lot of activity in that neighborhood association, and King doesn't have that.
Okay. Oh, yep, go ahead.
I was just saying, does King, you've probably contacted the alder person in
Sharice, yeah.
Sharice.
We did not contact city council people directly, although Dennis, for example, participated in some of what we were doing here through the neighborhood association. We could certainly reach out to them and ask them if they would, maybe they have regular communications that they have with residents. They might have a list that they email to. So that's a good suggestion. I think we could add that to our list of ways to do outreach.
And I, last summer, there were 2 areas in 2 different neighborhoods that had incredibly overgrown bushes, like covering the sidewalk, and either the city contacted those folks or the city just went out and chopped it down, but it was incredible, and it was great. So I can just highly recommend, if people know of areas where overgrowth is taking over a sidewalk or something, just contact the city about it, and they will make sure something actually gets done, which is delightful. But I do actually have a question, because it's not, I was biking down Vine up to Maine, and I love Lamborghinis. I really do, but the Lamborghini was parked on the sidewalk, which is already really thin on Vine at Illini Auto, I believe that place is called.
Oh.
So who do I should probably let someone know about that. They should at least
At the auto place?
Well, I should probably let someone at the city, I don't think me talking to them saying, hey, you shouldn't park your car on the sidewalk, it's a really thin sidewalk and it's blocking visibility for people making right-hand turns. I don't think they're going to hear much from me. But who do you think I should call? Just call parking? Okay.
Call parking enforcement. There's a number on the website, and then they would, they handle on a complaint basis.
Yeah. I mean, it was like I was biking, and I was like, oh, cool, a Lamborghini. They're such tiny cars, and you're like, oh, what a beautiful car. Okay, it's like right in my way. And, oh, now I see why this could really be a problem. And I just kept rolling. And until we had this discussion, I totally spaced that I will let parking enforcement know. Those are beautiful cars, though, that they park on that corner there. I'm just going to say that.
Yeah, I've been thinking about people parking on the sidewalk, so.
Okay. Any
Thank
others?
you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Good job. Okay, next is announcements. Anyone have announcements? Yeah, go ahead, Audrey.
I have an announcement, but it could also go under the future topics Vision Zero update. Either way. So.
You have an update for
Yeah.
Vision Zero?
For the future topics. So I don't know if you want to just put it under the announcements segment or wait until the future topics segment.
Why don't you go ahead?
Okay.
Oh, you're actually going to do a presentation?
Yes,
Oh,
I
okay,
have a
we probably should have added that to agenda, but we do have time, so,
Well, it's not for a vote. It's
Yeah,
just an
okay.
announcement.
for discussion.
Yeah. And an update. So the announcement part is something that really kind of piqued my interest. Was I heard about a terrible bicycle accident at the corner of Vine and Illinois, right outside here. A bicyclist, a graduate student, was heading into the, and this is from the Urbana Police Report, I might mention, it's completely public information. A bicyclist was heading west towards the university, when they had a green light. They were crossing in the lane closest to the curb, which both lanes can go through straight. And a van driver coming westbound and turning north onto Vine Street did not see the graduate student despite her bright yellow panniers and helmet and hit her and caused very serious injuries, probably comparable to the drunk driving incident, which we all heard of in great detail out on High Cross Road. The Urbana police were involved, of course. They're right here. The fire department was there. They were able to save her ruptured spleen by getting her to the hospital very quickly. She had a lot of serious injuries, hours of surgery for broken bones and so on. It didn't make the media at all. It's just not even a story because the driver wasn't drunk, which seems to be the thing here. Everybody thinks that impaired drivers are the story, or, individual responsibility is the reason for every accident, when actually the person just didn't see her. He was focused on whatever, trying to make a turn. And impaired driving is only amazing. I don't quite understand it, but it's reported in our traffic crash facts from RPC that it's only 4% of crashes involve alcohol and drugs. So impaired driving isn't the big story, and it's really kind of shocking how little media coverage there is. And that just made me interested to start looking into the statistics. How many, you can check the police reports anytime. It's all open in public. How many accidents are there at any given time that we're not hearing about? And in particular in Urbana, we have the RPC reports, and they tend to focus on the entire area. So we're going to just take a quick look. First, let me say the Vision Zero subcommittee has met, and we've studied this data, and we've come up with some reasons why it's time for Urbana to make a move on Vision Zero. We'd like to see that added to the agenda possibly next month or the month after to bring for a vote. And let me just go over real quickly what we saw kind of prompted by this accident into what's happening here. So we just had that report. It was finally approved in April 2018, I think, the traffic crash facts that's done every 5 years. Plus there's a rolling report card update, which this time they have just put it out. It's on the RPC website. It has a negative overall rating for the first time. The rolling averages are looking bad. Okay, serious A-type injuries, and I'm using the published reports. Taking those average annual injuries and making it on a per 100,000 people basis is what you see in the blue bars and the red bars. The blue bars are I took all the data and split Champaign and Urbana. So Champaign is over there on the left, and you can see the older period compared to the newer period. And their serious A-type injuries went up by 15%. We look at Urbana. Urbana was doing tremendously well in the older period, 1999 to 2007. It jumped up quite a bit, even beyond Champaign's on a per capita basis in 2008 to 2015. And the situation, at least with regard to fatalities, is even worse if we expand those periods out just a little bit with the data that we have. So we're looking at the serious A-type injuries, and that's the kind of injuries we're talking about with this cyclist. We're talking about life-changing injuries. She has barely gotten out of the hospital. This happened June 28th. She's looking for a house that's accessible for her. She's a grad student. I don't know how her career is going to proceed at this point. She is a grad student. So we also have a very much larger sample size, so we cannot say, oh, well, that's just bad luck, that's just by chance, that was a random thing. There are a lot of injuries represented in this, 1,400 injuries in Champaign, 600 in Urbana. Okay, total traffic deaths. Again, same period. Taking the bars as the per capita, and the numbers above are the average annual, by the way. So they don't exactly, it's per capita, so they're more comparable across the cities. The bars above tell you what the average annual actually is. In Champaign, the total traffic deaths actually fell in the most recent period. In Urbana, as you can see, the per capita deaths jumped up a lot. This is, again, as I mentioned, if you expanded that period a little bit on either end, it'd be even worse. It'd go from 0, with the data that we have, the earlier period is 0.9, and then it goes to 2.2, so it's even worse, or 2.1 deaths. But using just the period that I had on the RPC website, splitting it in half and dividing Champaign and Urbana, this is what we see. So it's, I was shocked. And I'm sure you're shocked. I mean, we think of Urbana as being the kind of the garden city, the place where people walk safely, the place where drivers are considerate. And we don't know what's driving this at all. We do know from some of the other studies that the police department has reported that a lot of the stops they make are not residents. It might be most of the stops are not residents. This might be representing people in a rush to get through Urbana. It could, we don't know what it is. It would take a lot more study to determine that. If we go to what the pedestrian representation is of that, in Champaign, 7% of the traffic deaths were pedestrian. In the red bar period, the most recent period, 44% of Urbana traffic deaths were pedestrians. That's the vulnerable road users. We, in Urbana, and we have a lot of pedestrians, a lot more pedestrians than on average. So our percentage of road deaths that are pedestrian far exceed the national average, which is something like 1 out of 5, including bicyclists. There is a bright point to this, that the number of cyclists is far fewer. And we can go on to that. The average annual, again, taking this on a per capita basis, both Champaign and Urbana saw a slight drop in pedestrian crashes. This is not deaths now, this is just the crashes involving pedestrians, but they virtually always involve injuries. Otherwise, I don't think most people even report it. Again, at the top, you see the actual average annual, and then the per capita basis. Urbana and Champaign are relatively similar. However, a far larger number of the pedestrians are dying in Urbana, suggesting maybe the cars are going faster. I don't know. There were 8 pedestrian deaths in Urbana. That's 1 per 14 crashes, per 14 average annual. There were 2 pedestrian deaths in Champaign in the same period. That's 1 death per 96 crashes. And bicycle crashes, again, good news here. Maybe the effects of BPAC and the bicycle-friendly designation, awareness, the education outreach, CCB, and so on, has actually improved the situation for cyclists. Because I think we all agree that cycling is probably increasing by quite a bit, and yet the numbers are down. The numbers of crashes are down, and the numbers of fatalities are really relatively low, very low. So, but injuries, as for this graduate student who was just severely injured, are treated as no kind of story at all, and they're there. Our perception is so shaded and biased by the media we see. We just don't realize what we're missing. I mean, the media, Cynthia sent me a infographic, the media coverage of, obviously terrorism compared to the number of terrorists, but there's many others, including cancer. The coverage is much larger. It's hard to realize that road deaths are actually a very leading cause of fatalities. The media coverage is almost zilch on that. And we just come to accept that. So there's many references, and I can send this graphic out to you, but essentially there is a reason for us to be looking at Urbana being a leader in Champaign County on this. The situation certainly merits it. We need to live up to our reputation, which has always been really good, I think, and we're looking at having a pedestrian master plan. I haven't seen the draft. I don't know to what extent this kind of statistics are going to be highlighted in that, but it's pretty hard to imagine us being designated as pedestrian friendly. Our per capita rate of pedestrian fatalities puts us in amongst the top 20 worst metro areas easily. So
that doesn't take into consideration how much people are walking, though. I mean, a campus community with a lot more people walking, you're going to have a higher per capita rate, right?
That's correct.
So it's
yeah.
like vehicle miles traveled. You don't know how many foot miles are traveled.
Yeah, there could
Okay.
be, some of those metro areas, there could be a lot less walking happening for the deaths that they're seeing. People, certainly could be hearing about it and staying off the streets. So the rate per walker probably could be a lot higher. Okay, so the handout that I've given you is the subcommittee's thoughts at present. We would need to work out what kind of further information that you need and what kind of resolution we should bring for discussion to BPAC in the next month or two. So is there any discussion? Questions?
Any questions for Audrey? Doesn't look like it, not this time.
I think everybody needs some time to absorb the data. It's a lot of data that we provided. And Jeff and Audrey and I have met several times and worked online, and Audrey's done a lot of the work on pulling the data, although I helped get us to the right databases in a couple of cases.
Absolutely.
The data's out there, it's
Timely.
just kind of hard to find sometimes. And so originally she was looking at the selected intersection crash analysis, but that's only taking the high crash intersections really in the community and looking at them. And we wanted to look at the entire community. So we looked at that data too. So it's there's a lot of data to sort through, and we know the state has a Vision Zero policy, and Chicago has one, and some of the communities that have adopted Vision Zero have been seeing good results as a result of the work that they've been putting in. And so that's all information that we can provide to when we bring back discussion about a resolution and how we think we can proceed. We know that we don't have the capability to dedicate a lot of staff time to putting that together. So we have to look at how we can do that with more of a volunteer basis, like Columbia, Missouri, and some other places did, where the volunteers did most of the work in figuring out how to put the policy together and how to proceed with implementation. So we'll try and give you all of that kind of information when we come back with the resolution.
Does anyone have any ideas, guesses why Urbana would have seen such a jump in serious A-type injuries, as is shown on this plot?
Not offhand, I can't think of any.
Especially-
That's-
Well, we know that we had a lot of crashes on University, and particularly in the Carl campus where there's a vulnerable population. And I think that there's some data to back this up, but also I think Urbana has a higher percentage of the disabled population living here. My understanding is that, based on comments from people in that community that have spoken with me, they feel it's easier to get around in Urbana than in Champaign if they don't drive. And so we may have a larger vulnerable population using our roadways, more people. We know we've got like 17% of the work trips are by walking. Why there was as big a change as there was between the two time periods, I don't think any of us can do anything other than speculate, but I think those are some of the factors that have played into that difference between the two cities.
The pedestrian debt, your reference to walking and disability and the hospitals and the students, that all plays into the 8 pedestrian deaths versus 2 for Champaign.
And also, Champaign grew faster during that time period than Urbana in terms of population, so the per capita is going to look different because they gained significantly more population than Urbana did. So I think that probably plays in to the statistics a little bit, but then you've still got the raw numbers, which also paint a not pretty picture for us.
Right. The raw numbers are the actual average annual, not adjusted for population there.
Yeah, so this one you have up now, the serious A-type injuries, that's for all crashes, like automobile crashes, everything.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, like you mentioned, Urbana is, I think, in our traffic stop discussions, about 50% of the stops are for people outside that don't reside in Urbana or have Urbana addresses. So there are a lot of people commuting through Urbana, and an increase in county population would mean more people commuting through Urbana or to Urbana to work. So the per capita is going to be a little distorted, but that's a pretty big, I like the trend data. I like the way you've set up as a trend, because it is hard to compare one city to another. It's also hard to just, with some of those small numbers and the deaths and stuff, then you get a lot of error, and you didn't try to calculate, I guess, error bars or anything like that. But with the small numbers, some of that wouldn't show up as statistically significant.
Right. These numbers are fairly
Yeah, but
large,
these
though.
are pretty good. I
Mhm.
mean, that one is pretty
Yeah.
interesting.
And I agree. I think that it has something to do with the swift passage of people going somewhere else, coming from somewhere else and going somewhere else. I mean, a lot of our major thoroughfares are controlled by IDOT. And IDOT has set the High Cross Road speed right where the bicyclist was injured at 55, which is kind of unbelievable in front of a major community attraction, you know, where the road has neck down like that. It's pretty astonishing. IDOT has set University Avenue at 35. I mean, IDOT has their priorities to get
But they
the
will be lowering
region.
That will be changing.
Yeah.
Yeah, they will be lowering that. I think the other thing that we should point out, by the way, is that the largest group suffering the serious injuries and fatalities here are people in cars. We really have a lot of people being seriously hurt and killed in cars, and so it's not just a pedestrian and bicyclist safety issue. There are a lot of people, and it's not just here. It's all over the country. But it's something for us to think about. It is a major public health issue that we have that many people being hurt and injured on roadways. And we've done an astonishingly good job on campus. We used to have a pretty high pedestrian fatality rate on campus, and both the cities and the university and MTD all worked really hard on that for about a decade, and we have been astonishingly successful in reducing that. We have not had pedestrian fatalities on campus, and we had only one bicyclist in a number of years. And given the intensity of the number of people and the amount of activity and the age group that we're dealing with and their proclivity not to pay any attention to where they're going, I think that we could really pat ourselves on the back and say, if we could do it on campus, we can do it in other places in the community.
The other thing, though, is that it's not just the infrastructure. Because I was looking at this, and you're talking about IDOT roads, and I'm thinking, so what if we looked at it for just the Urbana streets, and what if we looked at it per lane mile and things like that? I'm thinking infrastructure, but it's not just the infrastructure. It's about the communication. It's about how we do driver's ed training. It's about how do we talk about it with each other. It's about seatbelt compliance. There's so much involved in this, and it's not all like if we just had billions of dollars to spend on infrastructure, we could resolve it. It's really an entire culture of being safe and respectful to the users, paying attention. The cell phones of the world are, that might be why that person didn't see the bicyclist, is because it just zoned out, because we're all zoned out so much.
Well,
Stop.
I think absolutely. It's an entire culture, and it's a culture shift that has to happen, and that's the brilliance of Vision Zero, is to recognize that it's an entire system. There's many moving parts to this, and you have to have a systems approach, and the culture needs to change. I mean, the people who hit somebody who are not drunk get away with usually at most a $1,000 fine, even if they kill them. It's just absolutely shocking, which is not to say that I blame that individual and feel very vindictive about it. There's an entire culture behind this. But you go to the courthouse, which I have done to see what's going on there, and it's absolutely jam-packed with DWIs. I mean, this looks like a DWI processing factory. And yet, only 4% of the crashes were DWI. Are our priorities completely, not that I want DWIs on the street, but are
Well,
our priorities
It may
completely
be that the
straight?
enforcement has resulted in the low fatality.
That's right,
Yeah,
yeah.
because
I'm
it has
going
been a
to
big
cite
focus of
that as-
IDOT.
In fact, for pedestrians, it's only 3% of the pedestrians involved in crashes, and cyclists only 1%, and the cyclist is dead.
So from my perspective, this is something that it's sort of like my full-time job is on climate change now, and it's a huge issue, right? It's all of us need to be engaged, all of us need to be doing it. And it's hard to make a commitment that says, oh, we're going to accomplish this goal that we have no idea how to actually just do. It's not just do the jigsaw puzzle and you're done. There's a whole process, this whole cultural shift. It takes so much, but we have to start somewhere. And so this whole concept of a Vision Zero city, I think it's a great idea because it's a starting point. But I think there's concern about, how can we say we're going to do this when we don't know how? And we have to just take that leap. We have to go for it, because otherwise we're never going to know how.
Well, I think, this historical trend suggests to us that what we've got going on is not acceptable and that we can do better. Also, the fact that pedestrians and cyclists have some very encouraging indications there that we have done better on that. So where these total serious injuries came from, we need to get to the bottom of that and we need to fix it. And it can be done. It's not something we have to accept.
I would say, Audrey, it's anecdotal, but on my street, without me even involved, all my neighbors went out and bought Drive Like Your Kids Live Here, or Drive Like Slow Down. The whole entire street is populated with these these blue and white signs. People went out and purchased them. I was kind of snarky about it. I was like, this will make no difference. The street is too wide. That is why because it's, there's one car that's driving 70 miles an hour down the street. And everyone's like, get the license plate number. I'm like, it's going 70 miles an hour. It's hard to get the license plate.
What street do you live on?
Wabash off Washington. And so our street's very quiet, and that's what all my neighbors comment on when they come. And they say, your street is so quiet. And I'm like, yeah, because I'm a maniac and I would not buy a house on any of the other streets that you people who are talking to me about this live on. And so I have neighbors that live on Cottage Grove who every time I talk to them about it, they say, I need to come to City Council and talk to them about the speed on Cottage Grove. I need to come and talk to them about the speeding cars. It's very dangerous. And I say, yes, you should. I really would appreciate that help. And then I recently had because these signs are up, suddenly it's like everyone's talking, they've decided, oh, wow, people on this street have an idea, and this is, wow, there's something going on here, and so people are talking to us. I do think cars have actually slowed down because of the signs. I mean, they're literally in front of every house. There's one woman who lives on Washington, and she said that early in the school year they actually got together. There was a woman that went door to door. She really wanted the kids to be able to walk to school. They had a petition. They sent the petition to the city, or they wanted to. I have no idea. And they were like, can't we just get a stop sign at Anderson to slow down cars? Can't we, what can we do here? And they're all, people obviously are going to move. They're like, I need to get off this street. I can't live here. I have a 2-year-old and a 7-year-old. I can't raise them on this street. And Washington has beautiful houses that are big, but I would not buy a house on Washington because I could not handle that level of traffic going at that speed. If it was going 25 miles an hour, I wouldn't care, but it's not. And so that's the issue. And again, if we're designing streets for emergency vehicles to be able to go quickly on, every car can go quickly on that street, and thus they become unsafe streets. So that's kind of like that's just something I want to say. But on good news here, folks, I don't know if all of you got this mysterious email, but I got a mysterious email from Invitation to Pedestrian Safety Peer Exchange. Did anyone get this from IDOT?
Yes, I'm registered to attend. It's going to be here.
Yes, it's fantastic. IDOT on September 10th and 11th, and I was wondering if I should just send it to all of BPAC. I have no idea who's invited to this. And
anybody can register.
there we go.
As far as I know.
IDOT and the Federal Highway Administration have invited you to attend a pedestrian safety peer exchange to be held September 10th through 11th at the Illinois terminal. So I will be doing that, but I would just like to say I believe the residents of Urbana are very interested in this. I believe the residents of Urbana, if we present the information in an intelligent, concise manner, because I even said to one woman, I said, well, what do you think about Vision Zero? And she's like, I kind of heard it, I don't really know. And she's the same person who was like, we got to slow down speeds, we got to do all, and I was like, okay, we really haven't, we have to educate. And a lot of us in this room are trained as educators. And so it's going to be our job to have to go out there and try to put together a really nice deck that explains, because there's a lot of cognitive dissonance on this issue. There's a lot of misunderstanding. We all think the problem is cancer or terrorists, and that's actually not the problem. And also, we need to get people to live in Urbana and be in Urbana and not drive through at quick rates and try to get to their house in some other location. And maybe that does mean slowing down the streets. And maybe that does mean, hey, great, now I have to drive through Poketown. I'm not going to drive through Poketown. I'm going to drive a different way. Hey,
But I'm going to
it
live
worked.
in Poketown.
Yeah.
It worked
and
on
that's
campus.
what we actually need, because
So
our
that's what I got.
population
Those
is
are my
falling.
comments. That's my comment on that business. But yeah, this IDOT thing, I don't know if anyone needs an invitation to it, but I was kind of excited. It's exciting for me to see IDOT doing something like this.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, you can send that to all of us. I did have a question or comment on the availability of data. I mean, it's kind of discouraging to see 3 or 4 year old data, and you wonder if you've done anything right the last 3 or 4 years to make a difference. So I've looked at fires before. It's really hard to get data off of the fatality FARS site. It's not a very user-friendly interface. Have you discovered any other place where you can get?
I am going to send, I do have the 2016 data, but I didn't have all the data, and I got that from IDOT. The RPC didn't have it posted yet. So I'm going to send them an email asking where's 2017.
The fires
because
is just
they should be
fatalities
done
anyway.
with that by now. And I know 2016 was not great for our pedestrian deaths. 2017, I believe we might have had 0.
But you have
or
like
18.
all the crash data is more statistically significant than just looking at the death data. So if we can get more recent crash data, like through 2017 or 18, that would be great.
Yeah, we should be able to get it from IDOT. It's called the Crash Summaries by City. And it's hard to find these things. I can't remember maybe Cynthia sent me that one. But they didn't have 2017 up yet. So they did have a contact, though. So I'm going to send an email and ask where it is. It was interesting to see.
Okay, thanks a lot.
There was actually, I might add, in 2016, there was a fatality, one more in Champaign, and I didn't include, this 2016 is not in the state. I showed you one more than the RPC had listed in their report. I asked them why, and it was because their metro boundary is a little bit different than the city municipal boundary, as cities change. So IDOT had it listed as actually five fatalities. They had 4. So there's little, natural data is not easy. There's little, that's why you try and get it cleaned up if you can, but the RPC's running a little behind where the municipal boundaries might be, because they're based on the metro area, the census metro area. And if you would like to be a peer reviewer on this, that'd be great.
Okay, so the subcommittee is still meeting, and you want to be on the agenda, the next available agenda spot, you think?
Let's let you know whether we want to do August or September. We want to
Okay.
make sure we have everything in place. We don't want to bring half-baked.
Okay, so we're well into future topics now.
I had an announcement.
Oh, we're still on announcements. Okay, go ahead.
This last weekend, I had a Traffic Skills 101 class, and we had 6 students. 2 of them were from Urbana, and so that was really good. I have 2 more classes coming up for bicycle safety skills for adults, and I'll do a little more push out on PR for that. There's one July 27th. That's at the Urbana Park District at Crystal Lake Park. And that's 9 to 12, and that's a $10 fee for that class. And then there's another one, August 24th. This is for adults who know how to bicycle but aren't comfortable perhaps biking in the street and would like to learn a few more skills and have better understanding of how to bike in traffic.
Okay, thanks. Any other announcements?
I have an announcement. The third Thursday's Cycle to Suds ride has its inaugural ride July 18th. We'll be meeting at the Common Ground Food Co-op's front porch and will roll at 6 p.m. sharp. It will be free, fun, casual group bike joyride through beautiful Urbana. Our destination is Riggs Beer Company Beer Garden. This is a bike ride for everyone. Families with kids are welcome. There is no end time. Folks can depart on their own schedule or leave in groups and return to Common Grounds parking lot. It's dark out there. Use front and back lights on your bike. Wear a helmet on your head. There is a Facebook event for it as well. So everyone's invited to come. We'll be doing about 4 of those, starting in 92-degree Thursday evening weather. So.
Mm. There is a good route to Riggs if you go through Stone Creek rather than out to High Cross Road. Okay.
We don't bike on High Cross.
Okay. Any other announcements? No? Okay. Future topics. We have Vision Zero kind of on deck, and we have the RPC reports potentially on deck at some point, but we don't know exactly when yet.
But there's been some vacations, things like that going on, but it'll resume here shortly. I know on the bike wayfinding, we want to reconvene the steering committee when RPC's ready first, and then it'll come to BPAC, and then we'll start that process. And then the PED master plan, I think the same kind of, there's no steering committee for that, but same kind of process. So I would say right now the goal would be to finish it out here this fall.
Okay. And then, Craig, you said anytime we needed to help fill the agenda, you could put together the bicycle-friendly community report.
Yeah, I could do something.
And then the subdivision requirements for bicycle pedestrian facilities, kind of a prelude to looking at what our complete streets policy should be or means in Urbana. That we still haven't done because I haven't asked about staff availability for that. I could start pushing for that a little bit. Any other future topics? Nope. Okay. If there's nothing else, I guess this means adjourned then. Thanks.